Poems to a Listener, readings and conversation with contemporary poets.
The doll. The mother's back is turned. She stuffs the muslin body of a doll with cotton batting, stitches the red mouth shut in a wide, thin smile. The doll is softer than the wooden bride doll, with its human hair and painted eyes. The child will take him to her bed and feel his coarse wool curls against her face. He sleeps with both eyes open and they stare at everything.
Welcome to Poems to a Listener. I'm Henry Lyman, and in this half-hour program, we'll be talking with poet Margaret Robison, author of The Naked Bear, published by Lynx House Press. And we'll be listening to poems, many of which look back towards her childhood in a small South Georgia town called Cairo. The poem we just heard looks back towards the child, her mother, and two dolls.
I find myself going back as I go back in memory to look at the dolls that I had as a kid and see what they're telling me now. Going back into one's memory through the senses, through being able to see and touch a toy again, a doll, is a reclaiming of oneself.
There are two dolls here. One of them is the bride doll, the wood doll, the painted doll. And the other is the muslin doll, the soft one. And you prefer?
Well, I've never liked wooden, stiff dolls. I like something that I can take in my hand and something that feels good to the touch. My mother preferred the bride doll.
Would she have preferred that you be a bride doll?
I think she knew from the beginning that there was no way, Henry. The child at 3. Mother brushes my hair. I stand on a stool watching dust float in a broad slant of sun. Shadows are deep in the late afternoon. I follow the motion of dust with my eyes. Mother brushes until each hair obeys, then turns me away from the sun, her hands firm. And I see my pale doll with her curls carved of wood and her face. I wiggle my toes in my black patent shoes and watch the thin line of my mother's red mouth as she brushes and brushes my hair. To answer your earlier question, I suppose she was making some effort to make me into that wooden bride doll, wasn't she?
Well, the way she's brushing and brushing your hair.
I'm not really just talking about my mother. I'm talking about a culture, the way the culture shapes a human being. And I'm talking about that through memory, but I'm also talking about that as it is today, even today.
And not only in the South.
Certainly not only in the South. But I see whatever it is that I see about a culture through looking at my mother or my aunt or my friend or my husband.
And the whole place in which you grew up.
That's right. I believe it's awfully important to look at the place one grew up if one's a writer, because that place or those places are the places where one first learned distance and a conception of time, where one first learned what a tree is and what the dirt feels like. So our most rooted sense of place in ourselves and geographical place is in childhood. It serves us well. The father. The child walks with her father through the pecan orchard, and she is very young. The leaves are green like the skin of a lime held to light. Again and again her father stoops to gather nuts, cracks 2 in his fist. Removing the bitter wood, he hands his daughter the dark meat. The child is not afraid. The orchard spreads before her as far as she can see. She will always remember her father's knuckles, that they look like the dark meat of the pecans he cracks with his fist this day. Bitterwood and shell fragments falling to the cool orchard floor, mockingbird flutter of wings in the upmost limbs of the trees.
There's a kind of opening outwards here. There's a greater sense of freedom here.
This has to do with freedom.
He was a real companion.
My father and I had fun together. We fought together, too. That's a part of freedom. I was most angry in my youth with my father, but this did not devastate my father. He knew I loved him. The town. Someone said it was called Cairo because the railroad tracks cut through the Cairo of a sugarcane patch, and they built the town in that place. Wood shingles on the courthouse dome have been replaced with silver paint and trees cut down when North Broad Street was widened. The Blue Gable Drive-In's gone, and Meisel's Drugs goes by another name. But Mother stood in that drugstore and cried when we heard on the radio that Roosevelt had died. A double dip of ice cream and a sugar cone sold for a dime. The dentist over Meisel's, through the teeth he pulled, right out his office window to the railroad tracks below, the track bed thick with teeth. Nights, when the trains howl, split the town in two, I lay in bed imagining the people, the lighted windows flashing by, and from the wheels sparks bright as filling gold that streaked the tracks.
Did that dentist really throw the teeth out the window, or was that just what people said?
My mother took the Naked Bear to her book club, which has a wonderful history. It was a group of women who met, 12 women, I believe, who met once a month for 40 years to discuss books. And one woman said, "Margaret is not telling the truth. Dr. Cheney never threw teeth out his office window." And according to my mother's report, the room grew silent for a minute, and then it turned out that every woman in the room except that one woman had had her teeth thrown out that window. I had mine thrown out that window.
You had yours thrown out that window?
I certainly did.
Why, I thought your teeth were as real could be.
Mine are, but those were baby teeth.
Aha.
Those were baby teeth. This place, its oaks and sycamores, a geography unmarked by county lines. Noon, steam rises from the road, rainwater wet. The odor of pickle brine is heavy in the air. The dark wood vats, pickles and cobwebs floating. Across the road, the old cemetery, its black iron fence, graves, and the grass burnt brittle by the summer sun. The air after a storm, trees upturned, roots quivering, wires crackling across the ground, the telephones ringing. The old wallpaper, its roses stained and the wall remembering its own history at night, when the people sat on the porches counting the cars and saying, "This is enough," or saying, "Nothing is ever enough." The railroad station's floors are spit-stained dark with chewing tobacco. The projector in the Zebulon picture show is still. In the window of the library a sign, "Hitch your wagon to a star. Summer reading takes you far," and strings, from children's names to silver stars.
The poem focuses on the house, the town, and yet, at the same time, I feel that it's almost a picture of the mind, your mind,
It's myself very much in the present tense with that part of my past, those experiences, that part of me with me.
It's also dreamlike.
At the moment of bringing two parts of oneself together, there's a consciousness that is perhaps a bit dreamlike. This is the moment of connection. The poem is the process of connection. It's the act of bringing together on the page.
Process, then, is the key word.
That's right.
Which, of course, implies something that's ongoing, that's continuous, as one moves through memory, as the memory itself moves.
We're always moving and to get that motion on the page, I have to write the process out. The writing has to become the process of living. Isn't it a shame, Louise, him so young leaving that nice wife and those sweet girls? The coffin trembling when the widow kissed its lid, and rain beat on the canvas, ran like rivers to the grave. How could a just God, but you know he was a drinking man, but how could any loving, shh, daughter, it's a sin to question God. And I was quiet, but questioning, and questioning the eyes of grocers, bankers, preachers, children on the trapeze bars, the town tramp's eyes, the barbers, grinning eyes of teenage boys behind the rims of beer cans, eyes of teachers, white-haired Mrs. Weathers saying, "The way a person folds a paper tells so much about that person's character." Grandmother's eyes, cousins, and my crippled sister's eyes, eyes of the mailman striding up our walk, my father's eyes through cigarette smoke. I'd walk a mile for a camel call, for Philip Morris, Lucky's don't, my father said, look a black boy in the eyes, black boy's eyes.
You were questioning other people's eyes all the time, wondering about why they went around their lives the way they did?
I was always wondering, because I couldn't understand. And I looked for answers, of course, in people's eyes, in human beings.
But you weren't allowed to look in a black boy's eyes.
Well, I was told not to.
Why not?
But I was not always obedient.
And why weren't you supposed to?
Because black boys were supposed to be out for nothing good with white girls. Black boys had rape on their minds, according to the white community. Black boys were dangerous people to fool around with. They were wild and uncivilized. But one of the most powerful influences on my writing was the sound of the drums in what was called Niggertown. They sounded very like the beat of a heart, and they were rich and deep sounds. He carved a dancing puppet in the shade. Booker T sat in the dirt by our back steps. He carved a piece of pine, his knife blade shining in the shadows of our house, in the deep, cool green of shrubs he had clipped that morning. He carved a puppet with a long stick fastened in its back and cut a smooth, wide plank for it to dance on. I never showed him the clay birds I modeled, their eyes of cottonseed scooped from a burlap bag in Daddy's produce warehouse. I never looked in Booker T's dark eyes, but stood in our back door and saw him spit through his teeth farther than any white boy I knew, and I watched him make that pine wood puppet dance the blues.
Did you have much communication with him besides just watching him?
No, I was not allowed to play with Booker T. My brother was a boy, so he was allowed to play with Booker T.
Even though he was black?
Even though he was black. But not as an everyday social kind of thing, only as the child of a black man come to garden. Not as an acceptable friend, no.
Do you think he sees his own image in that puppet?
I'm sure he did, because the motion was wonderful. And sure, was confident.
And it's dancing. It's actually dancing. There seems to be a happiness about it.
And this is an artist you see at work, Booker T. And Booker T's having a good time. Booker T had confidence, and Booker T had fun. Even as a victim of a culture. That car. This morning, memories pop up without apparent cause. That car that lost its steering wheel, and we careened into an open field with a few dead trees still standing and a cow. 30 years ago. Now it has happened again, sitting here in the kitchen with coffee and the heat coming on. Early spring, and you spent yesterday cleaning the dust from the rooms, how it clung to the table legs, you on your hands and knees with the vacuum hose under the buffet. There's no end to it, the dust. Still, it was comic, that car full of people yelling, that car with a mind of its own, wild on the highway, jumping the ditch to rest in that field, and the cow looked up for an instant, then lowered her head and continued her grazing.
The old car, full of people, family, friends, whatnot, bouncing into the field.
The car was driven by a very stiff and proper middle-aged woman who would never go careening into a field if she could help it, and the rest of us were a group of boisterous, rather adventurous teenagers who loved it, and also loved her alarmed response.
It's like a portrait of the ship of fools.
Well, we're in trouble if the car doesn't occasionally careen into that field, you know. Somebody's occasionally got to snap that steering wheel off if things are going along too smoothly down the highway. It's fun. It's fun. Kayleen, 1943. When I was broken, he was kind. Weeded the garden, picked the suckers off the tomato vines. Months I lay, hair grown long, and couldn't understand his kindness. He brought me flowers, brought me sumac and quince. Then I got up, washed my hair, brushed it, and he laughed at me standing there with a brush in my hand. It, a Monday morning, and a smoky purple haze in the woods, slaughtered hog, strung from the oak tree. Crazy woman, he said, and took me there in the kitchen and was not kind. Then went outside with the hired men. I took the buckets out to the pump and filled them, because it was wash day and I had strong hands and a strong back. I could scrub his Sunday shirts clean without a drop of bleach in the water. I was proud of those shirts, hung on the line for anyone to see. So white, those shirts were so white they could put your eyes out when the sun struck them just right, climbing up over the barn roof and pecan trees.
We're way outside of town now, aren't we?
Yes, I'm very grateful for having found the voice of Kayleen. Kayleen is not an educated woman. Kayleen is a woman who's learned what she's learned by living as a farmer in a small southern rural community.
She's battered, to some extent. The way he takes her is hardly kind.
That's right, he was not kind. But Kayleen is a woman who has learned a good bit by living. She's a proud woman. She's a capable woman. I'm very fond of Kayleen. I don't have to look through contemporary society at its most confusing in order to see Kayleen. She's easily accessible as a human being.
She's part of you, I would guess.
She's more. She's more.
She stands in contrast, it seems to me, to the people in the town.
Well, as you said, she's outside the town. She's isolated. Saturday night. Miss Mabel Blair nods in her pale rose reading chair. Her sister Letty paints a robin on a china plate. The bushes in their yard are prickly and untamed, and 6 wild cats live in the shade. It's 9 p.m. Maud Parsons spits straight pins. Back in her pin jar says marriage grows like creeping paralysis, and double knots the threads in a flat felled seam. On Main Street, people sit on their front porches drinking iced tea while they talk about how that tornado last week picked up a mess of fish from Proctor's Pond and dumped them near Gray's funeral home in town, or how it ripped a column off the First Church and twisted trees up by their roots, or talk about how dry the summer's been. Down Slater's Alley, Jesus Saves blinks in bright neon red. Jeff Carter wipes white lightning from his lips. He pays the bootlegger Hattie Mae and snaps the garter on her thigh. Her throat scar shines. In a silver trailer at the edge of town, the gypsy Rosamond entertains 6 high school boys. Her fees are reasonable and service guaranteed. Mac Carson says, them drums in Niggertown sound just like Africa. The Baptist preacher writes his sermon out in ink. This town has one main street, a cotton gin, feed mill and courthouse, jail. The street lights glow. In her bathtub, Patricia Crawford slides down in the soap suds to her chin. She sings Your Cheatin' Heart and jams the water faucet with her toe.
Why is she jamming the water faucet with her toe?
Well, Henry, I've read this poem many times and I've never thought about that. Let me look at it. I know why she's singing Your Cheatin' Heart.
Why is she singing Your Cheatin' Heart?
There's a lot of cheating going on. And jams the water faucet with her toe. It says, I recognize something, and I see more clearly something that I don't like.
She doesn't want to hear it.
That's right. She's very representative. Cairo, Georgia is a rich place. It's rich in history. It's rich in people. For me, it was a wonderful place, in fact, to grow up. The South, and especially the South, as one gets that far south, is a lush place. But in any lush place, dangerous things grow.
And kinder things, too.
Kinder things, certainly. But it's a part of growing to be discriminating and to learn what's good and healthy and what's negative and unhealthy in any society one lives in. Cairo is the place that I probably love most. And sugar cones. Daddy sloshes coffee from his cup. Damn, Mother says, dabs with a napkin at her dress. My father clears his throat. Louisa not in front of the children. We eat ice cream and sugar cones, walnut, banana, chocolate chip, and peach. Outside, rain is beginning. Here, the ceiling fans are still, the lights turned on at 4 o'clock. Leaving the Cherokee Cafe, we see a legless beggar selling pencils, yellow, cheap. He sits on a wood platform with wheels attached and leans against the wall. He hums. Daddy clangs a quarter in his cup. We cross the street and climb into our car. The windshield wipers slap the drizzle, and my father shakes his shining head and sings.
The beggar hums. Your father sings.
My father gave me music. My father sang. He took us places. He was fun. And the thing that he did that was the most fun was to get lost, to pretend we were lost on country roads. And we would spend Sunday afternoon not knowing where the next turn would lead us.
And did a lot of singing?
A lot of singing. Sunday outings. My father drove us down the highway in the old blue Dodge. He always sang. We passed the slaughterhouse and pine woods, the Bloody Bucket nightclub with its neon sign, and crossed the red Ochlockonee River. My head is splitting, Mother said. My father gave her thigh a pat and sang, I want some red roses for a blue lady. Bubba and I drew imaginary lines dividing the back seat. The sweaty baby fussed, and Mother wiped its mouth and painted a scarlet Cupid's bow across her lips. My father smoked a cigarette, and I was car sick, watched the highway rush away beneath my feet, the hole that rusted in the car floor growing bigger every year. When I looked through the front windshield, sometimes I saw the highway in the distance shimmering like water, and one night I dreamed the river rose, the bridge washed out, and we were on it. But riding with my father, we never reached mirage or water on the road, just marks of rubber where a car had skidded to a halt, or the flat skin of a rattlesnake. My father said that I'd feel better soon. He'd stop at the next filling station for a Coca-Cola. Do you believe in Jesus? Are you saved? We'll pour Tom's toasted peanuts in our drinks, my father promised. I leaned into the wind and closed my eyes.
We've been talking with poet Margaret Robison, author of The Naked Bear, published by Lynx House Press. I'm Henry Lyman. Thanks for being with us.
Poems to a Listener was produced by WFCR, Amherst, Massachusetts, with technical assistance by Sheldon Katzman. Financial assistance was provided by the Massachusetts Council on the Arts and Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Massachusetts Foundation for Humanities and Public Policy.